Hi everyone, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Revelation 12 sign. There's something really important that I wanted to point out, and then I wanted to try to explain some things about my video that I did yesterday. But one of the things that I wanted to point out that I think is really important is that on September 23rd, the moon is actually not going to be under Virgo's feet. That doesn't actually happen until the 24th. That's when it can be considered to be under her feet, because if you look at the text, you'll see that it says feet, it's in the plural, and so the moon has to be under her feet, sort of like this image over here. You can see how Virgo's depicted with the moon under her feet, and that's really important because of what the moon represents, and I can talk about that a little bit later. And I just wanted to point that out because someone had suggested that it might be more important for us to focus on what's going on with Venus rather than Jupiter, being that Venus is a bright morning star. It's the planet that represents Jesus, and as I've recently come to find out, it's also the planet that represents the bride. It represents Esther, which represents the bride, and so I think it's more important to observe what's going on with Venus at this time than Jupiter. Jupiter I'm not too sure of. I don't know of any scriptures in the Bible that talk about Jupiter. There's the one that talks about Zeus, where it says in Revelation 2:12, to the angel of the church in Pergamos write these things, saith he which hath a sharp sword with two edges, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. And it was in the altar of Pergamum that there was a statue of Zeus, so this is making a reference to Zeus, and God is referring to it as Satan's seat. So Satan is referred to as Zeus or Jupiter in this passage. And it's interesting that it comes up in verse 13. Of course, it's in Revelation 13 that it talks about the mark of the beast. And so I just wanted to point that out and remind everyone of this image over here that was sent to me some time ago. And this is the original zodiac that was in the Dendura temple, and originally Virgo was depicted standing up, and it looks to me like there's two Virgos here, a smaller one and then the larger one, which I've talked about. And so if you're going by that image over there, you would see that the moon would be under Virgo's feet on the, well, actually the second Virgo. The first Virgo would be around the 19th over here. That was the one that was holding Leo's tail. And then on the 20th, it would be under the second Virgo, which was more in this position over here under the star Diadem, which is part of the constellation Comet Berenices. So I just wanted to point that out. I know it's just in a couple of days, but we don't know the day or the hour, so I wouldn't want people to be complacent that nothing's going to happen until the 23rd when it could happen at any moment. We just don't know the day or the hour. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, another thing I wanted to point out that really just dawned on me a couple of days ago, and that's the fact that Virgo, or the bride, has already been transformed at this point in Revelation 12 verse 1, because she's wearing the crown of 12 stars and she's clothed with the sun. And so that hadn't occurred to me before until just a couple of days ago. And I've mentioned before how the crown represents the DNA, the transformation of the DNA, and I can talk a little bit more about that later, but I just wanted to point out, because I've noticed people have talked about Isaiah 66 and how there seems to be a discrepancy, because it appears that this woman that's described in Isaiah 66:7. It's saying, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. But then when you go to Revelation, it would seem that this is a different woman, because over here it's saying that she's with child and she's travailing in birth. But what just dawned on me, like I said earlier, is that she's already been transformed at this point prior to giving birth, prior to the travail. So this all takes place at the same time. Another thing that I wanted to point out is over here where it says she brought forth a man-child. The word for brought forth, if you look at the parsing, you'll see that it's in the aorist tense, and the aorist tense does not indicate past, present, or future. It's just the aorist tense. It doesn't, let's see how it describes it here. It says the aorist tense is characterized by its emphasis on particular action, that is, the concept of the verb is considered without regard to past, present, or future time. So this doesn't say when she brings forth. It doesn't say if it's past, present, or future. It's just saying that she's the one who brings forth the man-child. So this happens all at once right here at the beginning as she's being transformed. And this matches up with the book of Esther as well, because you see it's over here in verse 1. It says, now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel, so that she was glorified at that point, and stood in the inner court. Talked about the inner court in Revelation 11, that the altar is where only the high priest was allowed to go, and in Revelation 11 it's saying, measure those who are in the altar in the most holy place, but only the high priest was allowed to go there. But then in Hebrews 10, I'll just start from verse 17, since this is the year 17. It says, and their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. Now where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he hath consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. So once the veil was rent, which represents Jesus' flesh when he died on the cross, that gave us entrance, or the way to have entrance, as it says here. So it opened up the way for us to have entrance through the veil. And of course that will be fulfilled once Jesus comes back, which the renting of the veil was a type and shadow of what will happen when Jesus comes back, and the Mount of Olives splits, which is a representation of that as well. Okay, so the other thing that's important about September 20th is that not only will the moon be under Virgo's feet, because as I said earlier, one of the Virgos is standing upright with the moon under her feet in that position according to the original zodiac, but Venus will make a conjunction with Regulus at that time as well. Okay, so now I want to try to explain some things about my video, and I'm not going to pull up all the images and everything. I'll just try to explain it this way. But in Esther 9, what I had noticed actually before I even pulled up the image is that it mentions the 23rd over here, and this is coming up in verse 9, so it looks like it could be a clue. But then I realized when I pulled up the images that this is actually the longest verse in the entire Bible, and it has 90 words in the Hebrew. So the fact that this is the longest verse might mean that this is significant. And then, like I said, this is verse 9, and it's mentioning the 23rd day. And then over here it's mentioning 127 provinces, and I've talked about the importance of the number 27 and how the ratio of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, which matches with the ratio of New Jerusalem, and the ratio of the earth, they all three have the same ratio, which is 1.27, which is used to determine the angle of the pyramid. You have to come up with that ratio first, and then you inverse tan that number to come up with the angle, and so they all come up with 1.27. And I've talked about how the number 27 seems to represent the year 2017, and also did a table which seemed to confirm that I've shown as well, but I'm not going to pull it up now because I have so many other things that I want to try to talk about. Okay, so verse 9 is talking about the decree that was made by Mordecai, which the king gave him authority to make a decree, and it's basically allowing the Jews to defend themselves, to gather together and to defend themselves against anyone that would come against them. But then when you get to chapter 9, there's another writing or letter that's being written by Mordecai, and this decree is for the institution of Purim, and it talks about this from verse 20 through verse 23. And it says over here, and Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of fasting, of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them. So over here from verse 20 through verse 23 is the institution of the Feast of Purim, and this is verse 23 is when the Jews undertook to do as had been written, but the writing takes effect here in verse 20. So I don't know if this is an indication of when this will be fulfilled, but it's coming up in verses 9:20 through 9:23. And I just watched this video yesterday. It was by Leeland Jones, that someone had sent me this video. And it's really interesting to me how he's made the connection between Esther and Revelation 12, and how this represents the year of Esther being prepared before coming before the king. And he's done it in a completely different way. The way I made the connection is mainly through the verse numbers, and because of the scepter in the Shiloh prophecy, it says the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the lawgiver from between his feet. But then in Revelation 12 you see the scepter mentioned again when the man-child is born. So that's how I made the connection, but he's also made the connection in a completely different way. But it's interesting, if you look over here, he talks about Purim and how Purim was actually the halfway point in this year of preparation. Okay, so the main point I wanted to make in this video is that we don't know the day or the hour. I just don't want everyone to be complacent that the rapture is going to happen on the 23rd, or it's going to happen on the Day of Atonement or some other day, and then be caught off guard if it actually happens sooner than that. My position is it could happen at any moment. We just don't know the day or the hour. Jesus comes as a thief in the night, and thieves do not make appointments, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a Moedim, but September 20th is actually the Feast of Trumpets. That would be the beginning of the Feast of Trumpets. So it could be a Moedim, but then again, it might not be. We just don't know. So I just wanted to point that out in this video, but I have a lot more that I want to talk about, and I'll just continue with more in the next video. Thank you.